Hello and welcome to the Thriller Zone. I'm your host, David Temple, here in Season 3. Welcome aboard. As you can see, the booth to the studio is open, which means work is done. On today's show, I am thrilled to welcome a guy that I've been following from a distance for some time. His name is Brian Freeman, and his book is The Bourne Sacrifice. Are you a Robert Ludlum fan? Well, then you're going to love this book. As you hear me talking with Brian here shortly, this book is going to be in my top 10 summer reads of this summer. I'll go into greater detail inside the show, but it is a doozy. As you're going to find out, I don't know how many times I've seen the Bourne movies, time and time again, but classics like that just never get tired. Anyway, without any further ado, Brian is in the green room, so let's get busy. Welcome to the Thriller Zone, Mr. Brian Freeman.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
This is an exciting time. By the way, let me throw this in here. We're going to get to Bourne Sacrifice very shortly. I have many things to say about it.
I'm just happy to see the book. I don't even have my own copies yet, so I'm excited to see it. I've been seeing that cover for a few months now, and I love it. So
you don't have a copy? I
don't have a copy myself. No, I've got the first two here, but no, I don't have my own copy of Sacrifice yet.
Wow, I don't know whether to feel badly or better that I beat you on something, but.
That's okay. I did have kind of a sneak preview when I wrote it. So
nice little thing they do for your book. They put your initials right in the middle. Did you know that?
I've seen that. Yeah, that's really cool. I love it. It's funny. Every now and then publishers do really interesting things on the inner jacket. A lot of times I don't actually notice it until someone tells me about it because I typically don't remove the jacket. So.
Oh yeah, I'm one of those freaks that loves. I love the covers. I love the, I spend a lot of time looking at who designs them and so forth. And we've got a couple of, there's one that, if I can just go off on a tangent here, looking at some of your books, we're going to talk about Bourne Sacrifice, of course, but there's one that you're getting ready to release in August called,
I Remember You.
Yeah. I love that cover. That is so cool.
Isn't that great? Yeah. Let me. I'll 1 second. I'll show it to you here.
Oh, good. See, I love show and tell.
Yeah, exactly. There we go. See, now I Remember You. So yeah, isn't that a cool cover? That's really, really striking.
The way the city just drips. And I got to admit, Brian, and again, this is all about Bourne Sacrifice, but then again, it's all about you. So, but I was, doing a little follow-up on your website, and I went to your Amazon page and started reading I Remember You, and holy crap, it grabs you right out of the start.
That was a fun, twisty one to write, I'll tell you. When you kill off someone in the first chapter and then bring her back to life, I always figure that's a good start. So
yeah, I'm not sure I've actually seen that happen before, and I know it's a little bit preemptive, but man, if you want to come back around and talk about that book, I'd have to read it first, but yeah, we can certainly talk about it.
There we go.
All right, I've completely forgotten where I was, going down a couple of different rabbit holes. I know what it was. Every photograph I have seen of you, you're standing somewhere in the cold. Now, either I know you live in Minnesota, right?
Right. Yep.
Is it truly winter all year round?
Well, there's a couple weeks in July that are not bad. Yes. We're actually in the midst of them right now. It's going to be 90 degrees today, so it does warm up occasionally.
Yeah. Wife and I went out to Minneapolis recently. First time I'd ever been there. What a lovely city.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I don't know what I was expecting, but it was lovely. Anyway, all right.
But now, yeah, the story behind my author photograph with I think it's got the red flannel shirt on it. It was actually about 2 degrees when I did that photo shoot, and so I was trying not to let my teeth chatter while they were taking pictures, and I promptly went home and then threw out my back because my muscles were so cold. So.
That's amazing. Well,
you got to suffer for your art,
Yeah, well, that's what it's called. Now, as a bit of background, a lot of times I will find, of course, authors who are writing about military thrillers, served in the, in the armed forces, and or if it's a cop book, they were a detective at one time. And so I always like to find out, okay, what's Brian's story? And the only thing I could find is that you were director of marketing and PR for an international law firm called Fager Benson, I'm thinking.
Right.
And
yeah, no, I'm a storyteller, but I don't have those specific experiences in the military or the police. And I mean, obviously, I do research on such things, and the nice thing is, the more books you write, the more you have readers that show up with particular expertise in various areas that are very happy and generous about sharing their wisdom. So that helps a lot. But my focus is on the storytelling side. In fact, I always tell aspiring writers, who are, they kind of tell me, oh, I'm going to go off and do the FBI training course or this or that. And I said, well, that's great. And that's terrific to do that kind of stuff. But just remember, and at the end of the day, your job is not, to be a policeman. Your job is not to be a Navy SEAL or an FBI special agent. You are a storyteller, and that's what the reader's looking for.
And that's an awesome thing for you to say. And I appreciate the fact, I mean, having now sold, 46 countries, 22 languages, almost 24 books, you give the illusion, as any good storyteller would, is that you were there. And you're kind of reiterating something that I had a conversation with someone recently, and that is, our gift, our talent is storytelling. We don't have to have studied all those things if you're a good researcher. Now,
right.
If you're gonna write a military thriller and you pull a bonehead move with the caliber of a gun, your readers are gonna go, David, really? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. There are certain areas that, honestly, it helps an awful lot to have specific background. I mean, if you're talking about an area of the genre where there's really, detailed knowledge necessary, and that might be true of, medical thrillers or legal thrillers as well. You're certainly skating a fine line there if you're coming from the outside. So, but I don't write military thrillers, and we've got a lot of great writers out there who do. So I figure, well, and I wish them well. So.
Yeah, and I would say, would you call your thriller pretty much all psychological thrillers, right?
My own thrillers, yeah, I would say they're pretty much psychological thrillers, exactly.
And let's do this just for shits and giggles. If you were telling this to someone who did not know, who was not wrapped up in the writing world, how would you describe, okay, Billy, a psychological thriller is?
Yeah, it's a story that's still going to be propelling you through the narrative, forcing you to turn the pages, getting you to stay up until 3 a.m. to find out what happens next. But by the time you get to that last twist, you're also so deep inside the heads of the characters that you're sharing the whole experience with them, whether it's the hero, whether it's the villain. You're that much in sync with the emotions of the characters that they really become a part of your life.
Excellent. And, going back to this director of marketing PR, what I wanted to ask, what was that like? And more specifically, what did you learn that has helped your writing career from that job?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, first of all, my favorite story about being a director of marketing at a law firm. I remember I was going home on the bus one day, and I was chatting with this woman, and she said, oh, so, what do you do? And I said, oh, I work at Fager Benson. It's a law firm downtown. And she looked at me rather suspiciously and said, oh, so you're a lawyer. And I just laughed and said, no, it's even worse. I do public relations for lawyers. She did not laugh. She looked at me dead serious and said, you're right. That is worse.
Wow.
So, I think it was right around that time I really started kind of getting serious about getting words on the page and getting that book written. So, but the reality is it was a great place to work. It was a great team of people, and I learned a lot about storytelling working at a law firm. And the fact of the matter is, I talked to a lot of litigators there, and the litigators were very open about the fact that when it comes to jury trials, the lawyer who's the best storyteller wins. You tell the best story, that's what the jury's going to respond to. And so I learned a lot from them about, kind of their storytelling craft.
I never thought about that. I just watched the new episode or the series Lincoln Lawyer, which I think it was on. Yeah. And I was just pulled into his storytelling, and I never really thought, I always thought it was the power of persuasion more than storytelling, in that if you can, more along the lines of a good salesman, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but it feels kind of like that, doesn't it?
A little bit, and yet the fact is, particularly in litigation, so many of the areas of litigation are very, very technical. There's a lot of detail that goes into it. It's really easy to sort of lose a jury in the details and technical minutia. And the litigators would always say, you have to cut through that. You need to be able to connect with them on an emotional basis and make the story resonate for them as people. And ultimately, that's what I'm trying to do in my thrillers as well.
Yeah, well, mission accomplished. I'm going to make a little play here because I serve both YouTube channel and my podcast, which is audio only. So I'm going to do some things here visually so that people can really appreciate a lot of your body of work. But you got almost 24 books here. So we got Jonathan Stride series, the Frost Easton series, Cab Bolton series, 5 standalones, and now 3 Jason Bourne books. First of all, golf clap. Second of all, at 29 years old, how have you been able to manage to write so many books?
Oh, you're so kind. You're so kind. It's when I think back to the beginnings of my, Jonathan Stride series, which those were the first 5 books that I did. The first Stride novel, I think, came out when I was 42, 43. And I will say Stride has pulled off a pretty amazing trick, because when I started writing the Stride series, Stride was older than me, and now here we are almost 20 years later, and I'm quite a bit older than Stride. So that's a nice trick he's pulled off. I wish I knew how he did that.
Yeah. And I know this question is much akin to, asking who's your favorite child, but do you have a favorite series and or character in your repertoire? And this could be inside the Bourne world or outside, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've heard that from readers for years. What's your favorite book? Who's your favorite character? And I always really struggled with that for exactly that issue, that it is kind of like trying to pick your favorite child. But honestly, I've written, there are 2 books that I've written in the past few years, The Deep, Deep Snow and The Ursulina, which are technically both standalones and yet also fit together hand in glove, to the extent that I almost think of them as one long novel, one long project. The Deep, Deep Snow was a finalist for the Edgar Award. The Ursulina just came out in hardcover and ebook this year. It was an audio original last year for Audible. And they're both written in first person in a female narrative voice, 2 different female narrators in the book. I always say that The Deep, Deep Snow is the story of a daughter, and The Ursulina is the story of a mother. And those 2 books, 2 very, very different kinds of stories, and yet they just go to my heart in a way that there's something special about those books for me. And I look back on those novels and I think, yeah, those books are the reason that I do what I do. So those ones are my favorite right now. Now, who knows? Next book I write, I may say, nope, that's my favorite, because for every year it felt like the next book I wrote, that would be my favorite because I was so close to the story. But The Deep, Deep Snow and The Ursulina, I love those 2 books, and they're a great way to discover my approach to storytelling too.
Okay, you just anticipated my next question, because that's really kind of why I brought it up, because everybody they got a secret favorite of theirs. And what I like to do is I know that if you have a favorite in your repertoire, then I want to know what that is, because I'm probably going to go straight to that and go, I'm going to read his very best work, as though, watch this, as though I only had time to read one of your books, because having now read Bourne Sacrifice and not having read your other Bournes, I don't want to jump it because I got enough stuff to say about that, but I'm like, I got to read, and this is no hyperbole, I have to read more of your work now. So there.
Yeah, and that's one of the advantages of having done a number of standalones over the past several years. Now it gives readers a good opportunity to kind of dive in and experience my work. And what's been fun for me over the last few years is just the sheer diversity of stories and characters I've been able to work on. I mean, on one hand, I can be writing one of my, stride novels, more police procedural, or I can be writing these very intense emotional thrillers like The Deep, Deep Snow and The Ursulina. And I can put that down and pick up, the action-driven, adrenaline-focused Bourne novels. It's just been a lot of fun being able to explore all those different sides of storytelling, and I've really enjoyed that.
So I'm trying to figure out the numbers here. Are you working on, I'm going to guess you're working on probably 2 books a year, right?
It's been 3 the last several years. Yeah.
Holy moly. Now,
I confess this year, I think I'm on track to only quote unquote do 2. I feel like I'm slacking off a bit, but the last few years, it was 3 a year for, I think, the last 3 or 4 years.
That is no easy feat. Now, I've talked to people who are, I'm 1 book a year, period. Then I'm talking to folks who are doing 2 and 3 and sometimes 4. And I'm like, all right, well, you know what it is? It comes down to discipline. I have to think, having written some books myself, if you have the discipline to set aside the time and plan accordingly, you can do it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really about knowing your own schedule and what you can accomplish and what you need to do to stay on deadline. There's no way that I could have been doing this back, in the early years of my writing career. I mean, I was just, building a familiarity with my craft, and it's because I've been, doing this for almost 20 years, and I've produced almost 2 dozen books, that I've got a comfort level now that lets me do it. But it's still hard. It's just crazy some days.
And I've read 2 blurbs that came across my desk in the last few weeks, and it's having to tell kind of the 2 masters of the craft. I mean, Michael Connelly said he called one of your books a page turner of the highest caliber. I got deep respect for Michael Connelly. I mean, the guy is prolific. So there's that one. The second one that blew my mind was to have Nelson DeMille call you a first-rate storyteller. I mean,
I gotta tell you a good Nelson DeMille story here. I got an email from a reader a few months ago, retired police officer, and happened to be a retired police officer from the town where Nelson lives. And he said, I've been meaning to tell you this story for years as to how I got into your books. And he said, years and years ago, he and his partner got called on a call to Nelson DeMille's house because an alarm had gone off at the house. And he said, protocol is when an alarm goes off, you have to, go inside and check the property, make sure everything's secure. So they were inside Nelson DeMille's house, checking to make sure everything was okay. And they were in DeMille's bedroom. And there on his nightstand, he had a copy of my first book, Immoral. and the police officer said, I figured if it was good enough for Nelson, then it was good enough for me. So he went out, bought a copy of Immoral. He read it, loved it, had been a fan all these years ever since. So that's one of the best stories I've ever heard.
Oh my God, dude, you can't top that.
Yeah.
Man, all right, let's get to this puppy dog. All right, Brian, if you know anything, if you listen to the show at all, I do a whole lot of reading, and I don't, no one has called me, is hyperbolic a word? I know if you were a person of hyperbole, would you be hyperbolic?
I think you would, yes.
No, okay. So I don't want to be hyperbolic, but this book, 2 words, holy crap. This is one of those books that first of all, I loved it. And while reading it, it was, and I can't say this about every book of this caliber, I felt like I was watching Matt Damon in a Bourne movie.
Interesting.
Maybe it's because I am a hardcore Jason Bourne fan and have watched all of the movies, or 4 of them now, right? So many times it's kind of embarrassing. I don't know why. To me, he's like an everyday James Bond, right? And this book delivers just that kind of a thrill. Matter of fact, Here's my almost like I'm doing a review. Action scenes intense and believable, characters multidimensional, and I literally didn't want the book to end. A lot of books, because I'm on a time limit and I'm preparing for shows, I'm like, geez, could this just get going? It's 600 pages now, but I didn't want this to end. So I'm putting this on my top 10 summer 22 reads.
Well, I really appreciate that, and I think you put your finger on a couple things that are really important to me with the Bourne novels. One is that there have been so many iterations of Jason Bourne over the years. I mean, you figure Ludlum wrote the Bourne Identity all the way back in 1980. So, here we are, 42 years later. And I got to tell you, I read the Bourne Identity all the way back in 1980 when I was 17 years old. And if you had told me that 40 years later, books would be coming out with my name and Ludlum's name on the cover, I would have said, oh, that's just crazy. So you had 3 Ludlum Bourne novels. You had, I think, 10 or 11 Eric von Luesbader Bourne novels. You've got all of the Matt Damon movies. And I may be one of the few people who remember that before Matt Damon was Jason Bourne, Richard Chamberlain was actually Jason Bourne in an NBC miniseries with Jacqueline Smith as Marie St. Jacques. So, I've got my Bourne cred here, but that's one of the things that I think creates a challenge, because you have a lot of people that have very different ideas of who Bourne is. And what I wanted to do was create a version of Bourne that would be very, very authentic to Ludlum's original vision, and put him in the modern era and create all new plots and characters around him, and yet do it in a way that people that have different visions of Bourne, like the Matt Damon version, would still feel like they're like dropped down into the middle of that series, and they can very readily picture, if they want to picture Matt Damon as Bourne, it flows naturally into the story. The other thing is, you mentioned the dimensions of the characters, and one of the things that was sort of interesting for me is, I mean, you talked about the fact that I write very psychological thrillers. They're very inside the heads of the characters, which, some readers may go, well, why do they have this psychological thriller guy writing, the action adrenaline driven Bourne series? But I think what makes Bourne so distinctive as a hero is he's fractured psychologically. He's lost his memory. He's struggling with this very fundamental sense of who is he as a man, and what's the nature of his morality. That's right inside my wheelhouse, and that's what I really enjoy working with the Bourne character, is exploring that sort of ongoing struggle he has of the kind of man he truly is.
Well, to say the phrase page turner seems nearly cliche, but there is a chase scene. I don't remember exactly where it is. I meant to put a marker in it, but boy, you're nearing the end of the book, and there's a chase scene that just, if your palms aren't sweating, I don't think your heart is beating. That's all I'm going to say. But I want to drill down on this idea of being welcomed into the Ludlum legacy, and when you were approached, do you recall what it is you thought, and maybe what you were asked at the time? How far would that have been back?
Yeah, that would have been coming up on 4 years now. I got a call from my agent to let me know that Putnam had taken over the Bourne series with the estate, and they were looking for a new author to kind of reboot the series. And was I interested in tossing my hat into the ring?
Jeez.
And so, I've been a Ludlum fan my whole life, and a huge Bourne fan. And I said, yeah, let's give it a try. And gosh, I think it was probably 4 months of radio silence went by, and didn't hear a word. And I just assumed they'd decided to go another way, which is fine. I'm sure there were lots of authors that were interested in the opportunity. And then my agent called back and said 5 words that will live in my memory for a long time. Putnam wants you for Bourne. And so I called Tom Colgan over at Putnam and kind of talked about my vision for how I would approach Bourne, and very much the way I was talking about, the idea that I really wanted to go back to Ludlum's original character without being tied down to everything that had been done with Bourne in the past. Because if you look back at Ludlum's books, you're in the Watergate and Vietnam era, and if you look at the Matt Damon movies, they've kind of taken them in a whole different direction, which was what Eric did in his books as well. I said, I just think we need to start over, sort of reboot the series from the ground up, but keep the Bourne character very true to life for Ludlum fans and for Matt Damon fans. Tom loved that idea, and I kind of mapped out how I wanted to approach it in the first of my Bourne books, which is the Bourne Evolution. And I did a few sample chapters, and he ran all that by the estate, and they loved the direction that I wanted to take the character, and we were off to the races. And and one of the things that I really feel great about is that when the Bourne Evolution was done and Tom passed it along to the estate, they came back and said, we don't want to change a word. So that's exactly what you want to hear, because with the Bourne Sacrifice, Publishers Weekly was saying, Freeman is a worthy successor to Ludlum. Well, there are a few compliments that are nicer for a thriller writer than something like that.
Yeah, that's pretty stunning. And I just got to meet Tom Colgan at Thriller Fest a few weeks back, and delightful guy, and talking about the guy that sits on top of the mountain with, I don't know how he does it. He's got so many different franchises that he's working on, and he's so monster talented, and he must just spend his entire day reading. I mean, yeah. Anyway. Such a fantastic book. I don't know if this is a kooky question but it's like, as writing as Ludlum, for lack of a better term, how do you feel like that differs? And I want this. This is aimed primarily for my writing listeners. Is there a different? How do you approach it differently from, say, Jonathan Stride? As far as method and so forth.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, Ludlum had such a very distinctive prose style. It was a very dramatic, very propulsive kind of prose style. It kind of had a breathless quality to it. And I think that because it was so distinctive, if you try to imitate the Ludlum style, it winds up feeling more like a caricature. And yet at the same time, if I just completely write in my own style, I think it feels, just like a Brian Freeman book and not like, a Robert Ludlum Brian Freeman book. So I have kind of a hybrid that's a little Ludlum and a little me. And I'm thinking through the prose in such a way that I'm just trying to let, echoes of Ludlum kind of, come through my style. And so I think what you get is something that's not exactly him, not exactly me, but this new combined entity that has qualities of that Ludlum propulsive style, and yet also has the sort of psychological depth of the characters that I like to bring to my books as well. And so in the beginning I didn't know, was that going to work, but I've been thrilled to hear from so many readers that have really loved what has come out of that, and hopefully it feels like a Ludlum novel, even though the style is just not pure Ludlum, because again, if you try to do that, I think it would end up feeling false.
Yeah. And speaking of your readers, do you ever sit this? I find this so curious for a number of different reasons. Do you ever read your reviews?
I learned all the way back in 2005 with my first book, Immoral, that it is psychologically a very unhealthy thing to read your reviews, because you can get 200 people putting out 5-star reviews and loving the book, and there's one person that hates it, and which one do you think you're going to focus on as a human being?
Yeah, the one that hates it.
Yeah, it's of course, exactly. And I think every writer wants every reader to be, totally happy and loving the book. And the fact is, the reason we have so many different authors and genres and different approaches to storytelling is because we have so many different readers who are interested in different things and are looking for different things in their novels. So there's always going to be folks that will read and go, nah, that's just not for me. Well, that's perfectly fine. But it means that, it's just I typically steer clear of that. And if there's a great review out there that that I should probably see, my wife will see it and kind of screen it for me and say, yeah, take a look at this one. So.
Yeah, I don't know what that is about our psyche, and you being a psychological thriller expert, you should be able to. I should practically call you Dr. Freeman as I get on your couch. But I wonder why we do that. Is it that we're so hungry for the accolade, or we just gonna we're gonna focus on that one thing, that one pebble in our shoe that we can't seem to shake? I mean, I just find that so curious.
I know it is a strange part of human nature, but it is. I've talked to enough writers and enough artists in other other media that have exactly the same experience, that I think it's just a pretty common problem for creative types. And I think I think most writers tend to be sort of neurotic creatures at heart, and I always tell aspiring writers that the biggest challenge you are going to face is not from editors or agents or publishers or readers. The challenge is going to come from inside you, because a writer is always his own worst enemy, and you have to kind of stare down that internal voice that says, well, yeah, you may have written 24 novels, but this time you're just not going to be able to do it, and you need to be able to kind of stare that part of yourself down and realize what you can make this happen.
I've got a question. I noticed that Bourne here, for instance, is through Putnam. But I could have sworn, am I right in this, that your standalone thriller that we're coming up in August, again, to give you an extra plug on that, is that, I want to say that's Thomas Mercer, isn't it?
Yeah, I've got relationships with 4 different publishers, which is it's kind of fun because they all have different ways of approaching their audiences, and they're looking for different stories. So a number of my standalones have come out through Thomas and Mercer. Obviously Putnam's doing the Bourne novels. My Jonathan Stride novels are being published by Blackstone, and they're also doing the print editions of my Audible originals. I also have a relationship with Audible. So the Deep, Deep Snow and the Ursulina, those came out as Audible originals, and now Blackstone has taken over the print and e-editions of those.
Okay, couple questions here. And the reason I ask this is because, again, so many of my listeners are up-and-coming writers such as myself, and we wonder, is that pretty standard operating procedure to have multiple publishing houses move variety books?
I think it's becoming a little bit more common. It was not particularly common, when I started doing this. But I really felt it was good from a creative standpoint and good from a marketing standpoint. I mean, I think the days when an author would stick with one publisher for his entire career and put out a book a year and there you go. That really has not been a workable model for a while now in the publishing industry. And so I felt that, so many publishers have, waves of success that, that having multiple relationships from a marketing standpoint was a more secure way to approach the industry. So that if one publisher starts to have issues, you haven't got all your eggs in one basket. You also have other relationships that can kind of take up the slack.
That's the best phrase right there. Not all your eggs in one basket. And I hadn't thought about that, but you really are in the best possible position because you're diversifying risk.
Right. Exactly right. That is exactly right. So I'm going to take 5 seconds and do something really important. I'm going to release the cat from my office because
go right ahead. Okay, this is a good time to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll hear about Brian Freeman's secret sauce. Stay with us.
Hey there, I'm Brian Freeman, author of The Bourne Sacrifice, and I'm hanging out with David Temple in the Thriller Zone.
Your favorite authors, The Thriller Zone. And now back to the show.
For fear of sounding like Captain Obvious, I read somewhere that you're known for those "you are there" settings. Sure. Again, back to describing to someone who may not be familiar with that. How would you best describe that?
Well, yeah, setting is so important in thrillers. I mean, it really enriches the drama of what's going on. So you're always looking to have the location of a chapter reinforce what's going on inside that chapter. And so I want readers to be able to feel as if they've been dropped down into the middle of every chapter, and they can hear it and touch it and feel it and sense it happening all around them, like they're invisible observers. And so that's an important part of creating the book. So in for a lot of years, what I would do is typically I'd be visiting all the locations in person, and being there allows you to really feel what it's like to be in that area. And it's not just a question of physical senses, it's also a question of, I call it the 6 senses of place, because there's this additional layer of what emotions does a location evoke, and how do you feel when you are in there, what's going through your head. If you can capture that, then I think it's going to really come alive for the reader. But it's been trickier the last few years because, of course, thanks to COVID, a lot of us have not exactly been able to do on-site research in the same way that we'd like to. So I've been able to sort of figure out alternate ways of researching locations, and it helps, having done this for enough years that that feels okay. I'd still love to be walking down the street of every location that's occurring in a Bourne book or one of my other books, but it's now at a point where in the world that just hasn't proven practical. So.
You brought up a really good point. I've never thought about it this way, but it is that 6th evident sense that is that feeling, that almost this intuitive feeling, like, whether it's I've been here before or this area makes me feel like this. And that's something, you can do Google flyovers and research your ears off, but if you don't really exist inside of it,
right,
it's that extra little bit that brings it alive.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Now, I've enjoyed watching the evolution of your book covers. Back to my book cover, Gaping. There's a great evolution. And as I got to the end, I'm like, okay, Brian, oh yeah, Season of Fear, oh yeah, Turned to Stone, oh yeah. And then I get all the way to the end, and I'm like, The Agency by Ali O'Brien. Wait, is that a misprint? Well, what is that?
Oh yeah. Years ago. This is going back, I think, to 2009. I actually, my agent at that time was based in London, and she'd always wanted to write a book set in the wild and woolly London publishing industry, and but she wasn't a writer, so she came to me and said, "Hey, would you ever consider teaming up on a book?" And I'm always looking for a creative challenge. I thought it sounded like fun, so I came up with the plot and wrote the book, and she offered her feedback, and we used a combination of our two names for the author. So she was Ali, and I was Brian. So Ali O'Brien became the author, and we got a great response. It was reviewed, got a great review in People magazine, and had a lot of fun with it. So yeah, it was practically what they call chick lit. I mean, it was more of a funny romance, and I actually wrote a second book, kind of a sequel to it, called West 57, which you can actually find out online under the name B.N. Freeman. It was hard because not long after The Agency came out, my lovely agent Allie passed away very suddenly and unexpectedly. So I wasn't even sure I wanted to do another book because the Agency was so wrapped up in my relationship with Allie. But I felt like West 57 was already in my head, and it was sort of a tribute to Allie to write the follow-up book as well. So yeah, that was how I dipped my toe in that side of the business. So
Sex and the City meets The Devil Wears Prada.
Pretty much. Exactly right. That's exactly right.
I love it. Well, and that was going to be my next question, which is kind of how it teed it up, is like, if you were to ever stop and not do this very specific genre that you have nailed, do you have a secret ambition even to do something completely off the reservation, under a pen name, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I have been blessed to have an amazing career in publishing over the last 2 decades, and at this point, I take on projects because they sound like fun. I mean, the idea of taking over the Bourne series, I mean, that just sounded like a hell of a lot of fun, and it was. I mean, this has been some of the most entertaining writing that I have done, in my whole career. It's just a great honor. So for me, going forward, I would love to be able to dip my toe into other genres as well. I could see myself, trying historical fiction. I wouldn't mind writing nonfiction. I could see hooking up with someone to help them write their memoir or autobiography. There's all sorts of different things I'd like to try. I just love telling stories. That's what I'm in it for. And so being able to explore other aspects of that, and to me, that sounds great.
Yeah. Well, I love that. Before we get to our infamous rapid fire questions, I have a question that I always like to ask all my authors, visiting authors, is this. If you were to offer a single piece of advice for either an up-and-coming writer or someone who's considering it perhaps as a profession, what would that piece of advice be? And it doesn't have to be just one thing, but kind of that catch-all.
Well, the first thing I always tell aspiring writers, and it sounds obvious, but 100% of unwritten books have never been published. It seems like an obvious thing, and yet, as I said earlier, I think for so many writers, whether it's established writers or aspiring writers, we're our own worst enemy. And I can't tell you how many aspiring writers I've talked to and heard from who will get 50 pages of a book done. And then just walk away from it. They'll feel like, it's just no good. It's not going where I want it to go. And again, it's that voice in your head that just keeps telling you, I can't do this. And that's the voice that you've got to silence. And you've got to figure out that, ultimately at some point there's going to be a relationship between, the keyboard and your backside and some super glue, because you're going to have to just sit down and keep writing. And I tell folks, look, don't question yourself as you start writing. Don't constantly reread and edit those opening pages. Keep going, keep telling the story, because when you get to the end of the story, odds are you're going to go back and realize, hey, those pages that I thought those were no good. Actually, yeah, that kind of works for me. So that's what it's all about. You got to believe in yourself, and you got to keep going and get that first book done.
It is funny though, isn't it? It's the monkey mind. It's the guy on the shoulder that's doing the judgment that really it's not based in reality. That's one thing I have to always tell myself. That's just an emotional hit. You're feeling weak or insecure. That's all that is. It's because you've put the time in, you've put the words down. Take a breath, walk away, right? Come back. Yeah.
And I don't care whether you're working on your first novel or you're working on your 25th. I'll tell you, it never goes away. I mean, it's still a part of the way the writer's brain is wired. And I have as much, nerve-wracking, doubts and challenges, 20 years into this business that I had when I was getting started. It's just, I think that's part of the creative experience. And you have to sort of learn that, to use that to your advantage and realize that, that self-doubt is actually going to end up making a better book, because you're just going to, demand, higher standards from yourself.
It makes me think of that phrase when people go, oh, do you ever get writer's block? And I'm like, you might hit a bump, but how about getting up from the desk and walking away and walking the dog or having a lunch and coming back? Because cops don't get cops block, or, firemen don't get fireman's block. I mean,
yeah, writer's block kind of gets in the way of my eating. If I don't publish a book, well, I'm not making any money. So yeah. It is, you can't let that kind of stuff stop you. And, I've learned that I don't call it writer's block. I have what I call tough chapter days, where you're just working on a chapter and, it's just not coming together the way you want it to. And your immediate reaction is, well, we've had a good run. That's it. Never going to be able to write again. And the next day you go back to it and like, oh, okay, here's what you do. And it all comes together. So.
Yeah. I love that. All right. How about a little rapid fire questions? Really easy. When writing, Brian, do you prefer a loud, hyperactive, caffeine riddled coffee shop, or perhaps someplace quiet like a library or a home office?
Actually both. I switch it up quite a lot. And sometimes I'll write in the quiet of my office. Sometimes I'll write outside. Sometimes I'll pick up my laptop and go to a coffee shop. And sometimes if I'm writing a scene where there's music involved, I'll actually have my headphones on and I'll be playing the music that's in the scene as I'm writing that chapter. So.
Oh, I love that. Okay. Number 2, as for discipline, do you prefer banging out an exhaustive outline before you sit down to craft the masterpiece, or do you have a basic idea and just wing it?
It's kind of in the middle. I do an outline, but it's much less intense than it used to be in my early books. I see it now as sort of more of a roadmap of, here's where I'm starting, here's where I'm going, and there's some kind of mileage posts along the way. But I don't like to sort of lock myself into a structure, because even though I know who's doing what to whom and why, I like to be able to massage the suspense in the story as I'm going.
It's so amazing how many conversations with, you'll be our 76th, I suppose, or 77th episode. And how many conversations I've had about this very topic. And they generally are polar opposites. Oh no, I write by the seat of my pants. Oh no, I outlined the bejesus out of it. And very few people, I would say you're probably right there in the middle. So you have a good structure, but you don't get tied to it because, and I think this is part of the magic of being a great organic storyteller is I bet you, Brian, you are still surprised by some of the things that are happening, right?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. And you learn to be able to sense where the drama is as you're going, and you know when you need to change things around. And things that seem like they're going to work when you're doing an outline, when you actually get into the reality of it, it's like, nope, we got to go a different way here. So.
I was, my very first couple of books, I winged it, just pure winged it. And then along the way, I thought, well, I hear about this outlining. And I did an exhaustive outline, like all the way to and then I started writing it. And I personally found myself getting a little bored only because I felt like I had already discovered everything and now I was just filling in the blank. That's neither here nor there or good or bad. It's just, particular.
No, I think that's a reasonable risk that, that you're writing, you don't want your writing style to feel flat if you're just sort of, kind of putting an outline of words on the page. I mean, I think you want that spontaneity that comes with, crafting things as you go, but it's different for every writer.
Exactly. All right. Number 3, you and your wife have decided to ditch the cold of Minnesota for a month and just disappear to a nice exotic tropical island somewhere. Let's pretend you would love that. What 2 or 3 books would you be taking with you? You might be there a while.
I would, if I were, I assume we're saying books that I did not write.
Yeah.
It's always fun rereading mine too. I would probably take Nelson DeMille's The Charm School. I think one of the great thrillers of all time. I'd take In a Dry Season by Peter Robinson, just a magnificent police procedural that cuts back and forth between the present and World War II. And I think I would also take Michael Connelly's Bloodwork, which, I love the Bosch novels, but Bloodwork still, I think, my favorite of everything he's done, because the solution to what's going on is just so elegantly simple, and yet you never see it coming. And that's what I always look for in a great thriller, is that the solution to the mystery should ultimately have been staring you in the face the whole time, and you just never saw it there.
That is so hard to do, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh man. All right. 4th and final, Hollywood producers have come calling, bought the rights to Bourne Sacrifice, and want you to choose a new Jason Bourne. So, who would you pick and why?
Oh boy, that's a tough one. Yeah, I'm not going down that rabbit hole. I tell you, I think I'd like to take Matt Damon and peel a few years off him and put him back in there. But and who knows? I mean, heck, Liam Neeson is still doing thrillers, and he must be 85 by now. So there's no reason Matt couldn't take over for one more.
Yeah. Side note about Liam, he's now doing kind of the same movie over and over again.
Yes.
And back to Matt though, Brian, I got to tell you something. I went drilling down this morning to find out if Matt's going to come back. And I'm like, to me personally, there is no other Jason but Matt, but that's just me. And have you heard one way or the other? Do you have any idea?
I have not heard anything. I know that I think it would take an amazing script to get Matt on board, because I saw interviews where he was not happy with the script for the last movie, Jason Bourne, and so I mean my attitude is, well, I think he ought to be reading some of the other books that are out there. But the timing to me would be so perfect. I mean, now it's been quite a few years since we've had a Jason Bourne novel. I think, given Hollywood looking to rebound after the pandemic, getting Jason Bourne back in theaters would be a tremendous move. So I really hope they're working on it.
Yeah, I can't say that his last one was my favorite.
No, I wasn't terribly crazy about that one. I thought, the first three, the ones that had the Ludlum titles, I thought all three of those were excellent. So.
Yeah. Well, from your lips to God's ears.
Let's cross our fingers. Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, folks, to learn more, visit bfreemanbooks.com and follow him on both Twitter and Instagram at the same B. Freeman Books. Brian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
And I hope we can come back around, maybe chat about I Remember You, hint, hint.
Yep. Happy to do it. Actually, if you want to chat a little bit later this year, I'll have both I Remember You out and the next Jonathan Stride novel, The Zero Night, will be out as well. So we can compare notes. So.
Wait a minute. It's July. You're talking about getting 2 more out by Christmas?
Well, they're all done, fortunately. So, yeah, this has been quite the year. I mean, actually 4 book launches this year. The Ursulina came out in print and on February 1st, and now the Bourne Sacrifice, I Remember You, and the Zero Night all coming out in the space of about 3 months. So,
and one thing I just popped back into my mind, and I want to bring this up. So you said you're working with Blackstone Publishing.
Yeah.
Blackstone Publishing is now one of my favorite new companies. I've been watching them for a while, but I got introduced more deeply by way of Andrews Wilson and then by Rick Blywise, who wrote a book called Pinion Scorpion.
Yep.
But here's the thing I love. Their attention to detail and quality on both the jackets and the creation of the book. You may think, oh, it's just a book. No. Peel it away and look at some of what's going on underneath, like Hotel California, for instance.
Yes. Yep.
Holy moly, they've taken quality to a whole new level.
Yeah, they put out a great product, and it's been really exciting to see them, evolve over the last few years, because Blackstone started out exclusively as an audio publisher. In fact, they've been my audio publisher since the beginning with Immoral. They were my publisher all the way back then. And since they see them moving now and having taken over ebook and print books as well, it's been a really exciting transition, and they've brought some great authors into their catalog. They're terrific to work with.
Yeah, that's what I hear. Just nice things. Well, folks, once again, the book is, and you're going to want to add this to your summertime reading. I promise you, it is. It's on my top 10. But again, Brian, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
The book is The Bourne Sacrifice. Robert Ludlum's legacy continues and is in good hands with Brian. Folks, before I go, I want to remind you of just 2 simple things. Number 1. Love your emails. Please feel free to email us at any time. thethrillerzone@gmail.com. That's it. You got a complaint, you got a request, you want to hear about our swag, they're getting ready to open a store soon. You tell me about it, I'll get back to you, I promise. And number 2, please do us a favor and subscribe to our YouTube channel. youtube.com/thethrillerzone. It helps build an audience. You can also click that little bell and it'll ring, not literally, but it will let you know when new episodes drop. So we love your subscriptions to the show. I can't wait to tell you who's on the next show, but there's a couple of people vying for that position and it hasn't been confirmed just yet. So I'm going to leave you in a little bit of suspense and simply say, we'll see you next time for another edition of The Thriller Zone.
You're